with that. So anyway, but Maurice, have I left anything out, or what's your reaction to what I had to say?
I'm all in with what you said. First of all, I got my pink on. I did my research. They said Sophie Cunningham's favorite color is pink. I said, dang it, I gotta find something. Sophie went rogue. You let us know you are back on this side of the street because we were worried for a second. But it's good to know we got Sophie Cunningham back. Listen, Whitlock, I think you hit the nail on the head. This thing is over. This thing is done.
Here's a theory floating around. Nobody in this story wants to wear the villain jacket. Word is Caitlin Clark doesn't want to rock the boat with her loyal Iowa and Midwest fans by coming out and saying she wants out. Meanwhile, Stephanie White and the Fever front office don't want the blame for building a weak roster around their franchise star. So here's the play everyone's waiting on. Both sides are hoping Clark makes the first move and asks for a trade herself. That way, the front office gets to say, hey, we tried everything to keep her.
Listen, Whitlock, I think you hit the nail on the head. This thing is over. This thing is done. The reaction, and I'm sure Charles could speak to this being a longtime coach, when a player makes a game winner, yet alone a first professional game winner of their entire career, that's not the way you look. That's not the way you celebrate. Caitlin Clark looks like she was in a funeral in that locker room. Caitlin Clark looked like a hostage in that post-game presser. She's got to find a way to get out of there. This thing is...
Panel jumped on this idea fast. Pretty much everyone was nodding along. One of the commentators even threw in a funny bit, saying they'd done some digging on player preferences and found out pink is Sophie Cunningham's favorite color, so now they're rocking pink too. They also seemed genuinely relieved that Cunningham looked like she was opening up and speaking freely again. But the bigger point everyone kept circling back to, this whole situation looks like it's about to boil over.
She's got to find a way to get out of there. This thing is over. Caitlin Clark was off to a blazing hot start versus Washington, and Stephanie White wanted no parts of it. The second that girl picked up a foul, it was like, thank you. Now I can do what I've been wanting to do, which is to sit you down. And Jason, you know, they checked her out 30 seconds into the second quarter, and a few minutes later, Caitlin Clark tried to check back in the game, and Stephanie White told her, no, go sit down, and Caitlin Clark.
Speaking from their own coaching background, the panel made a simple point. When you hit your first game winner as a pro, you're supposed to look happy, not like something's wrong. But that's not what people saw. Clark's face in the locker room, her tone at the press conference, it looked more like stress than celebration. And the takeaway from the panel was blunt. She needs a way out of this situation. They also brought up a game against Washington, where Clark came out strong early, picked up one foul, and just like that, Stephanie White pulled her off the floor.
And Clark was absolutely pissed about it, and Sophie Cunningham was telling her, hey, it's okay. You could see that interaction on the bench as well. But this thing is done, man, and I think that at this point, it is a PR battle. Caitlin doesn't want to look like the bad person. The Indiana Fever want her to force a trade so they could say, hey, there was nothing we could do. We did everything we can to keep her. She forced us to do this. It's a PR battle, but Caitlin has to find a way to get out of there.
Clark tried to check herself back, and just minutes later, White reportedly waved her off and told her to stay on the bench. And you could see the frustration all over Clark's face. Cunningham was right there next to her, trying to talk her down. At this point, the panel said this isn't even about basketball anymore. It's turned into a full-blown PR war, with both sides just trying to dodge the blame. But their bottom line stayed the same. Forget the optics, Clark needs to get out of there. One commentator even pulled up old footage. Clark hitting a big shot back in college versus this recent moment. And the difference was night and day. Same player, completely different energy. And that, they said, is exactly why she needs a fresh start.
PR battle, but Caitlin has to find a way to get out of there. Seeing her, I did a comparison. You know, she made a bunch of big shots at Iowa, obviously. I did a comparison of her in the locker room and at the press conference after she hit that huge game winner versus Indiana while she was in college. Compared to this, it doesn't even look like the same human being, guys. It's nasty. It's bad. She has to get away from there. I don't care if you have to take a PR hit. At this point, the Indiana Fever are doing more than enough to damage your brand at this point.
Something strange is happening inside the Indiana Fever locker room. and the footage everybody's talking about proves it wasn't just a bad night. It looked like a message. Let's start with what slowed-down video from the Washington game actually showed. Sophie Cunningham was seen making her way down the bench, hugging teammates, celebrating the moment like any player would after a big win. But then she reached Stephanie White, and instead of the warm, natural reaction she gave everyone else, Cunningham barely looked at her coach. Just a quick, distant handshake, almost robotic, before moving on. She did the same thing with a couple of the assistant coaches too. It wasn't until she got all the way down to the end of the bench that you finally saw real emotion. A teammate jumping up, arms out, genuinely thrilled. That contrast is what caught everyone's eye. Why would a player who just helped win a game look so guarded around her own coaching staff? The read from the panel was simple. That muted reaction wasn't random. It looked like discomfort, specifically discomfort that it was Caitlin Clark and not someone else who ended up with the ball in her hands for that final shot. And here's where things get even more interesting. Based on how the play was set up, where the players were standing, who was positioned where, this final possession was never actually designed to end with Clark shooting. Everything about the formation pointed to the ball going to Kelsey Mitchell to attack the rim. Clark's role, according to this reading of the play, was to set a screen and create an opening for someone else, not to be the one taking the shot. And this isn't just speculation. Lexi Hull herself confirmed it in a radio interview. She said flat out that the play wasn't drawn up for Clark. It was built for Mitchell. So think about that for a second. The Fever ran a game-winning play. Clark ended up taking the shot instead of the player it was designed for. She made it. And instead of pure celebration, what fans saw afterward was tension, distance, and silence from the people who were supposed to be celebrating with her. Now let's talk about how the organization has handled the fallout, because this is where the story gets even messier. Reports came out that the team actually asked Sophie Cunningham to delete a social media post, a post that has since disappeared completely. Nobody knows exactly what it said, but the fact that it was quietly removed speaks volumes on its own. And here's the pattern worth paying attention to. When it comes to defending certain roster decisions, or when Stephanie White wanted to push back on fans complaining that the team's style of play wasn't exciting enough, remember, she came out and said she wasn't there to entertain people, only to win. The organization responds fast. They're quick to defend themselves in those moments. But when it comes to damaging narratives specifically involving Clark, including harsh commentary from certain media figures, that same organization goes quiet. Radio silence. No pushback, no defense, nothing. Why the difference? One theory floating around is that this silence isn't accidental. If certain commentary happens to align with a narrative that paints Clark as the source of friction on this team, staying quiet actually works in the organization's favor. It's not that they agree with it outright. It's that letting it breathe doesn't hurt them. Now, does this mean Clark is impossible to deal with? Not exactly, and it's worth being fair here. Even people making this argument admit that Clark can be a demanding personality to manage. But that's true of basically every generational talent in the history of sports. High difficulty, high-ceiling players have always required a different kind of management, and the value they bring almost always outweighs the friction involved. That's not a knock on Clark. That's just what comes with coaching someone operating on a different level than everyone else on the floor. Let's go back to that game-winning moment for a second, because the body language around it says more than any quote could. After Clark's shot went in, 3 of her teammates moved toward her immediately, arms up, genuine excitement, the kind of reaction you'd expect after a walk-off shot. Mitchell, on the other hand, looked far more reserved. She reacted, but it wasn't the same energy, and she shifted her attention elsewhere pretty quickly. Now, to be fair, there's a human explanation for this too. Sometimes teammates, even well-meaning ones, can struggle to fully grasp just how special a truly elite talent is, especially when that talent is still relatively new to the level she's now playing at. This isn't about painting Mitchell as some kind of villain. She's a talented player and, by all accounts, not someone acting with bad intentions. But the tension in that moment was still visible, and it says something about where things currently stand inside that locker room. There was another moment too. After a missed shot by the opposing team, teammates surrounded Clark in celebration again, and again, Mitchell reacted more passively before eventually joining in. Once is a coincidence. Twice starts to look like a pattern. So what's actually driving all of this? A lot of it comes down to system fit. The Fever's current offensive approach leans heavily on isolation scoring opportunities built around Mitchell. Clark's game, on the other hand, thrives in completely different situations: pick-and-roll creation, transition offense, setting up teammates rather than just creating her own shot in isolation. These are two very different styles of basketball, and right now, the team appears to be trying to squeeze both into the same system instead of fully committing to one direction. Here's an important piece of context. Last season, without Clark on the floor, the Fever had success driven heavily by Mitchell's individual scoring. That's not a small detail. It may have unintentionally created a stylistic conflict once both players were sharing the floor together. Instead of building a system specifically designed around Clark's unique skill set, the coaching staff appears to be trying to accommodate both approaches at once, and the result is a team that doesn't fully unlock either player. One conclusion drawn from all this is that separating the two through a trade could actually benefit everyone involved. Mitchell, paired alongside Aya Boston, and whatever comes back in a potential return package, could continue playing to her strengths in the style that worked so well last season. Meanwhile, Clark could move into an environment specifically built to maximize her game, her vision, her passing, her ability to create in transition, and yes, that deep three-point shooting that made her must-watch television back at Iowa. But not everyone agrees that separation is the answer. There's a counter-argument worth hearing out, that pairing two elite backcourt talents together shouldn't be treated as a problem to avoid. It should be the goal. With the right structure, playmaking and scoring aren't supposed to clash. They're supposed to complement each other. Under the right system, this duo could realistically be one of the best backcourts in the entire league for years to come. From this point of view, the real issue isn't Clark, and it isn't Mitchell either. It's the organizational structure and the coaching approach that's failing to bring the best out of both of them. Still, even acknowledging that possibility, there's a recognition that if the current environment keeps creating this kind of visible tension, a trade allowing Clark to build a team around her own strengths elsewhere might end up being the more realistic path forward. And here's the sobering part. Regardless of how this all eventually plays out, the current trajectory doesn't look like it's heading toward a championship this season. Now let's talk numbers, because Clark's 2026 season tells its own story. This year has been marked by an uneven return from injury, with her shooting numbers sitting well below the standard she set during her rookie year and back in college. After missing all but 13 games in 2025 due to a string of leg injuries, Clark came into this season hoping to build on that earlier breakout success. Instead, she's dealt with recurring physical setbacks and inconsistent shooting form. Through much of the season, her field goal and three-point percentages have trailed her career norms, at one stretch sitting at just 38. 3% from the field and 3% from three overall, with individual stretches even worse than that. There was a brutal 5-game stretch in June where she shot just 28. 9% from the field and only 11% from three. Her own coaching staff described those numbers as the lowest of any comparable stretch in her career. And through it all, Stephanie White kept telling reporters she wasn't concerned, that every shot Clark takes looks like it's going in, and that she keeps making winning plays even when her shot isn't falling. There's also the Aaliyah Boston piece of this puzzle, and it might be the most overlooked part of the whole situation. Boston signed a $6 million deal and has had stretches where she hasn't scored in entire halves. Why? Because the offense has pulled her away from the basket, turning her into a point center hub instead of letting her operate in her natural spot near the rim, all in an effort to manage how much the ball stays in Clark's hands. In other words, this isn't just affecting two players. It's rippling through the entire roster, and nothing about the current setup seems to be working the way it should for anybody involved. So where does this leave things? On one side, you've got a superstar dealing with recovery, inconsistent shooting, and what looks like visible tension inside her own locker room. On the other side, you've got an organization that moves fast to defend itself publicly, but stays silent when the criticism happens to target Clark specifically. And in the middle, you've got a roster full of talented players who all seem to be operating in a system that isn't fully built around anyone's strengths. Whether the answer is a trade, a coaching change, or a complete system overhaul, one thing is becoming harder to ignore. The version of this team that fans were promised isn't the version currently on the floor. And until something changes, That gap between potential and reality is only going to keep growing. If you want to stay ahead of this story as it develops, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this situation is far from over, and when the next update drops, you're not going to want to miss it.